It is indeed an honor to have a nationally renowned advocate for children address our 2003 graduates this morning. Please join me in welcoming to the podium our commencement speaker, Marian Wright Edelman.
Thank you. Thank you. It is a great honor to share this day of accomplishment with your trustees, your president, your chancellor, your distinguished faculty and administration, with your families, but most importantly with what I am sure is the best graduating class in the history of UMass Boston. These are challenging, perilous, and promising times. We are living at an incredible moral moment in history, blessed to experience the beginning of both a new century and millennium. How will we say thanks to God for the life, earth, nation, and children that God has entrusted to our care? What legacies and values will we stand for and send to the future through our children to their children, and to a spiritually confused, balkanized, and violent world desperately hungering for moral leadership and community? How will progress be measured over the next 100 or 1,000 years if we survive them? By the kill power and number of weapons of destruction we can produce, or by our willingness to shrink, indeed destroy the global prison of violence constructed in the name of peace and security? Will our era be remembered by how many material things we can manufacture, advertise, sell, and consume, or by our rediscovery of more lasting, non-material measures of success, a new Dow Jones for the quality of life and justice in our families and communities and in our nation and world? Will our legacy be how rapidly technology and corporate mergermania and greed can render human beings obsolete, or by our efforts to reach a better balance between corporate profits and corporate caring for families and communities and the environment? Will we be remembered by how much a few at the top can get at the expense of the many at the bottom and in the middle? Or by our determination to close the huge gap between the haves and have-nots in a world where the net worth of 476 richest people exceeds the combined income of 2.5 billion people in the poorest 65 nations. Now, I want to be clear that I don't begrudge anyone their first, fifth, or 10th million or billion, if they are earned on a fair playing field and after our children's crucial survival needs are met. But something is out of kilter in our own nation, where one insurance company executive last year earned the same income or the equivalent income of 9 million families, and where our 3 richest Americans had more income than the tax revenues and the revenues of 25 state governments with 50 million citizens. They did not need a tax cut in 2001, and they did not. And they sure didn't need another set of tax cuts signed this week in 2003. I think that we need to attend to the business of our jobless parents, even of our college graduates who can't find jobs. And when we're dismantling Head Start, cutting child care by 200,000 children when parents need to work, cutting after-school programs by 570,000 in the budget that is pending from this administration when parents need to work, when we have 1 million children who are homeless in the richest nation on earth, we need to get our priorities straight, and I hope you will say so. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the very great German Protestant theologian who died opposing Hitler's Holocaust, said that the test of the morality of a society is how it treats its children. I think our world is flunking Bonhoeffer's test. Every year we permit 11 million children to die in their early years from preventable poverty and disease. And the United States is flunking Bonhoeffer's test by permitting a child to be abused or neglected every 36 seconds, to be born into poverty every 41 seconds, and the majority of our 12 million poor children live in working families trying to play by the rules, can't make ends meet. That we're flunking Bonhoeffer's test when we allow our children to be born without health insurance every 59 seconds. And to be killed by guns every 3 hours. We have lost 90,000 children to gunfire in this nation since 1979. That's more than all of the American battle casualties in Vietnam. What's happened to us? That the killing of children has become routine. Let's stop the killing of our children. How do we do that? I think first by asking hard questions and not being satisfied with rhetorical or cosmetic answers. I like the questions that Tracy Chapman, the folk singer, asked in her song called Why? Why do babies starve when there's enough food to feed the world? Why, when there are so many of us, are people still alone? Why are missiles called peacekeepers when they're aimed to kill? Why is a woman still not safe when she's in her home? Love is hate, war is peace, no is yes, and we're all free. But somebody's have to answer. The time is coming soon. Amidst all these questions and contradictions, there's some who seek the truth. Let's seek the truth. Let's ask hard questions, and let's hold ourselves and our leaders accountable for getting honest and true answers. Second, a lot of people are in despair because life is complex now, and a lot is going on in our world, and we're feeling very insecure with the war on terrorism and a war in Iraq. But I want us to keep our eye on what we must do and stand for as a nation, and we must all believe that we can save our children and then do it. Those figures that I laid out about our children in poverty and without health care are not acts of God. They are our choices as human beings, as citizens of a rich and powerful nation. And if we can crack the genetic code and send a spaceship to Mars and men and women to the moon, we can figure out how to teach our children how to read by 4th grade. We've got to make that commitment and believe it. And please don't ever give up insisting that children be protected first, no matter the political or economic weather. Let's stand for our children. Second, let's just continue to be strong. You've been strong to get where you have in your achievement here today, and let's be courageous and leave the results to God. I love what Henry David Thoreau did and wrote. And he said once, plant the seed of hope and caring and leave the garden to God. Many dismiss Thoreau as a crank or as a social deviant, but the long-term seeds of his efforts paid off. Leo Tolstoy read Thoreau's essay on civil disobedience some years later. Then Gandhi read Mr. Tolstoy, and then Martin Luther King read Mr. Gandhi, and Mr. Thoreau came back to the United States in the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s. Let's just keep planting our seeds of caring, and don't be afraid to speak the truth in scary times or to be a voice in the wilderness for children and the poor. It's the moral and sensible thing to do. And don't be intimidated or silenced by critics or by budget experts or by political spin masters or by anybody who might label us unpatriotic or unrealistic or say we're engaging in class warfare or are bashing any political party when we share the facts. Keep sharing the facts and speak up about unjust national, state, and local budget and policy priorities. You don't need a PhD in theology or philosophy to know it's morally wrong and hypocritical for leaders to say no child left behind while leaving no millionaire behind and leaving millions of children behind in poverty and without health coverage. Finally, let's just really remember that God created every child and that each child is sacred. And the reason I think so much of this is happening is because many people distinguish between our own children and other people's children. And I want to just end with a moving story I heard about a month ago down at the Children's Miracle Networks, when a father wrote a letter and said that everything God does, he believed, was with perfection. Yet my son Scott cannot learn things as other children do. He cannot understand things as other children do. Where is God's plan reflected in my son? Attendees who heard his questions were stilled, and this father continued to say that I believe that when God brings a child like Scott into the world, an opportunity to realize the divine plan presents itself. And it comes in the way that people treat that child. He said one day he and his son Scott were walking past a park where boys were playing baseball. And his son asked, "Dad, do you think they'll let me play?" Scott's father knew that most boys would not want him on their team, but he also understood that if his son were allowed to play, it would give him a much-needed sense of belonging. So Scott's father approached one of the boys on the field and asked if Scott could play. The boy looked around for guidance from his playmates, and getting none, he took matters into his own hand and said, "Well, we're losing by 6 runs and the game is in the 8th inning. I guess he can be on our team, and we'll try to put him on in the 9th inning." In the bottom of the 8th, Scott's team scored a few runs but was still behind 3. At the top of the 9th, Scott put on a glove and played in the outfield. Although no hits came his way, he was obviously ecstatic just to be on the field, grinning from ear to ear as his father waved to him from the stands. In the bottom of the 9th inning, Scott's team scored again. With 2 outs and bases loaded, the potential running one was on base. Scott was scheduled to be the next at bat. But would that team actually let Scott bat and give away their chance to win the game? Surprisingly, Scott was given the bat. Everyone knew a hit was all but impossible because Scott didn't even know how to hold the bat properly, much less connect with the ball. But as Scott stepped up to the plate, the pitcher moved a few steps to lob the ball in softly, so Scott could have a chance to make contact. The first pitch came and Scott swung clumsily and missed. The pitcher again took a few steps forward to toss the ball softly toward Scott, and as the pitch came in, Scott swung at the ball and hit a slow ground ball to the pitcher. And the pitcher then picked up the soft grounder and could easily have thrown the ball to first base, but he instead, and knowing that this would have ended the game, took the ball and threw it on a high arc to right field, far beyond reach of the first baseman. And every boy on the field began to yell, "Scott, run to first, run to first." Never in his life had Scott made it to first base, and he scampered down the baseline, wide-eyed and startled. Everyone then began to yell, "Run to second, run to second." By the time Scott was rounding first base, the right fielder had the ball. He could have thrown it to second baseman for a tag, but the right fielder understood what the pitcher's intentions had been. So he threw the ball high and far over the third baseman's head, and Scott ran towards second base as the runners ahead of him deliriously circled the bases toward home. As Scott reached second base, the opposing shortstop ran to him, turned him in the direction of third base, and shouted, "Run to third." As Scott rounded third, the boys from both teams were screaming, "Scott, run home." Scott ran home, stepped on home plate, and was cheered as the hero for hitting a grand slam and winning the game for his team. That day, the father said softly, with tears running down his face, the boys from both teams helped bring a piece of the divine plan into our world. What is that divine plan, the father asked? I don't really know. Perhaps it's a little bit different for each of us. But this much I can tell you. We are all vital players in the cause of helping children. And I want to end with a quote by Albert Camus, speaking to a Dominican monastery in 1948, who said that perhaps we cannot prevent this world from being a world in which children are tortured, but we can reduce the number of tortured children. He described each of our responsibility as human beings, if not to reduce evil, at least not to add to it, and to refuse to consent to conditions which torture innocence. I continue, Camus said, to struggle against this universe in which children suffer and die. And so must each of us come together to struggle against the conditions and unjust priorities that leave so many of our children behind. Only when each of us joins this struggle to truly leave no child behind will the cries of the prophets for justice and for peace become a lasting reality. Godspeed to the class of 2003.